It was supposed to be a normal afternoon grocery run, but as one man carried his bags home, a single encounter on his own street spiraled into something far more disturbing. Accusations flew, tensions rose, and within moments, the quiet neighborhood became the stage for a shocking confrontation. A woman's snap judgment turned into a call for police backup. What she didn't know, the man she targeted wasn't just any neighbor, but someone whose truth would change everything.
Marcus Johnson had lived in the neighborhood for over a decade. A dedicated father, a decorated officer, and a man who believed in keeping life simple, his daily routines rarely drew attention. Neighbors often saw him jogging early in the morning, waving politely as he passed by. He was the kind of man who helped carry groceries for the elderly, fixed a flat tire for a stranger, and never sought praise for it. To most, Marcus was just a quiet presence, steady and reliable. That Saturday, he had taken his son to the local market, filling bags with fresh fruit, vegetables, and the small treats his family loved. It was an ordinary errand, the kind of moment no one would expect to become unforgettable. Yet, beneath the calm rhythm of his day, something was about to shift. In a community lined with pristine lawns and strict HOA rules, Marcus knew the unspoken truth. He didn't quite fit the picture some people wanted. While many neighbors welcomed him, a few held on to their silent judgments, the kind that revealed themselves in cold stares or whispered complaints. He had ignored them for years, believing kindness would always outweigh prejudice. But that afternoon, as he walked back to his truck with grocery bags in hand, the weight he carried was more than food. The stage was already set for a confrontation he didn't ask for, one that would expose the fragile mask of civility his neighborhood wore so well.
Marcus placed the grocery bags carefully into the back of his truck, his son already climbing inside with a smile, excited about the treats they'd bought. The day should have ended right there, quiet, ordinary, and uneventful. But before Marcus could close the tailgate, a sharp voice cut through the still air. "Excuse me, what do you think you're doing?" The words came from across the street. A woman in a bright yellow dress stood with her arms crossed, her teenage son beside her. Her glare was pointed not at the truck, but at the man standing next to it. Marcus, accustomed to neighborhood interactions, offered a polite nod and reached for the last bag. But the woman stepped forward, her voice rising. "Those groceries, you didn't pay for them, did you? My son said he saw you with them. You need to put them down." For a moment, Marcus froze, unsure if he had even heard her correctly. His son leaned out the truck window, confused by the sudden accusation. The woman's son chimed in, pointing accusingly. "Yeah, Mom, that's the guy. He was taking groceries that weren't his." The accusation was absurd. Marcus had receipts tucked neatly into his pocket, proof of every item. But it wasn't about groceries. It was about perception. Her belief that a black man in her neighborhood loading a truck with food must have done something wrong. Marcus tried to respond calmly, explaining he had just returned from the market, but his words fell on deaf ears. The woman's voice grew louder, sharper, drawing the attention of others. Curtains shifted, doors cracked open, neighbors began to watch. And then, with a quick pull of her phone, she dialed the number that changed everything. "I'm calling the police," she declared, her tone triumphant, as if catching a criminal in the act. Marcus felt his chest tighten. He knew too well what such calls could mean. Innocent men had seen their lives ruined, some even ended, by false accusations. His son's wide, frightened eyes locked onto him, silently asking if they were in danger. As sirens began to echo faintly in the distance, Marcus's heart pounded. He could explain, he could show the receipt, he could prove his innocence. But deep down, he understood. Sometimes the truth wasn't enough. The neighborhood that once seemed like home now felt like a stage, and everyone was waiting for the next act. And when the police cars finally pulled up, lights flashing against the tidy suburban lawns, Marcus realized the real confrontation was only just beginning. The flashing red and blue lights washed over the quiet street as two police cars rolled to a stop. Neighbors leaned farther out of their doorways, whispers spreading like wildfire. The woman in yellow waved frantically, her voice dripping with certainty. "That's him! The man stealing groceries!" Marcus stood tall beside his truck, his son's frightened face still pressed against the window. He raised his hands slowly, not because he was guilty, but because he knew how quickly situations like this could spiral out of control. His heart hammered in his chest, not for himself, but for the little boy watching, learning how the world could turn on him in an instant. The officers stepped forward, their hands hovering near their belts, their eyes darting between Marcus and the accuser. The woman's son shouted again, "We saw him! He was taking stuff that wasn't his!" The mother crossed her arms, convinced she had delivered justice. Marcus's throat felt dry, but he forced himself to speak. Calm, controlled. "Officers, these are my groceries. My son and I just came from the market. The receipt is right here." He carefully reached into his pocket, pulling out the crumpled slip of paper. But the tension was suffocating. Every movement felt like it could be misread. His son's eyes filled with tears, silently begging for this nightmare to end. The entire neighborhood seemed frozen, waiting to see if this man would be branded guilty without cause. One of the officers took the receipt, scanning it quickly. His brows furrowed. He turned, locking eyes with Marcus, and then his expression shifted. Shock, recognition, respect. The woman, sensing something slipping, snapped, "Well, arrest him already!" But what she didn't realize was that Marcus Johnson wasn't just another man with groceries. He was their commanding officer, the very man these policemen reported to. And in that instant, the balance of power shifted in a way she never saw coming.
The air grew heavy with silence as the officer lowered the receipt. His voice broke the tension with quiet authority. "Ma'am, this man isn't a thief. He's our commanding officer." The woman's face drained of color. Her certainty, once shouted across the street, crumbled into stammering disbelief. Neighbors who had lingered to witness humiliation now stood in uneasy silence, shame flickering across their faces. Marcus's son pressed his hands against the glass, watching his father, no longer just his dad, but a man who had turned false accusation into undeniable truth. Marcus didn't gloat. He didn't raise his voice. He simply gathered his groceries, placed them gently in the truck, and held his son close. But inside, a storm of emotions raged. How many others, without his title or authority, would have been dragged away in handcuffs? How many innocent men and women had faced a fate sealed not by evidence, but by prejudice? For Marcus, the incident was more than a personal insult. It was a reminder of a system where appearances still dictated guilt, where a simple errand could become a battlefield of survival. His son had seen it with his own eyes, the danger of being judged before being known. As the police cars pulled away and the streetlights flickered on, the neighborhood returned to its polished quiet. But nothing felt the same. The woman's fear was no longer his burden. It was her reflection to carry. And for everyone watching, one truth hung in the air. If authority had not been on Marcus's side, what story would they be telling now? So ask yourself, How many more lives must be tested by bias before we finally see one another for who we truly are?